Coming up today, 2 suspects are dead and 8 are arrested in police raids in Paris, targeting the suspected mastermind of the terror attacks in the French capital. President Park Geun-hye is in Manila for this year's APEC summit. She's expected to outline specific policy directives for inclusive growth based on South Korea's own experience. Plus, the United Nations confirms that discussions are underway about arranging a trip that'll see UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon visit the North Korean capital. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Thursday, the 19th of November. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you ever so much for tuning in. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this afternoon, it appears the hunt goes on for the suspected ringleader behind the Paris terror attacks. Now, details are emerging of the ferocious raid that killed 2 terror suspects in the northern Paris suburb of Saint-Denis on Wednesday morning local time. A staggering 5,000 bullets are said to have been fired by the police, and the building where the raid took place is now at risk of collapsing. Identification of the 2 bodies is proving pretty difficult due to the severity of the siege and the resulting gun battle. One of the dead is said to be a woman who detonated her suicide vest. Now, 8 people were arrested, but the lead prosecutor in the investigation says that the suspected mastermind of the Paris terror attacks, Abdelhamid Abaoud, was not one of them. Sources say the suspected Islamist militants were planning a fresh attack on the city's La Défense business district for the following day, which would have been this Thursday, including a shopping centre and the main square of the district. The Paris prosecutor confirmed the terror cell had been planning new attacks but didn't elaborate. And the militant group that calls itself Islamic State claims to have published a photograph of a homemade bomb that brought down a Russian passenger jet over Egypt's Sinai Peninsula late last month. The picture, which appears in the group's latest edition of its propaganda magazine, shows a can of Schweppes Gold soft drink. You're looking at the picture there, and what looks like a detonator of some kind and a switch set against a blue felt background. Now, ISIS also claims that it exploited a loophole at Sharm el-Sheikh airport to get the device onto the plane. It also says it was originally planning to blow up a Western plane over the Sinai Peninsula, but changed its mind after Russia launched airstrikes on ISIS-held territory in Syria. All 224 people on board the Metrojet plane headed to St. Petersburg were killed when the airliner was destroyed in midair on October 31st. Now, the growing anxiety prompted by the terror attacks in Paris and also that plane crash is being felt here in Korea as well, which has had its own share of scares in recent weeks. Korea has been deemed one of the safest places in the world when it comes to being safe from terrorism. But as Agwon-soa went out to ask members of the public and experts whether they think Korea is safe from terrorist attacks.
France, Russia, and Lebanon have all been hit by major terrorist attacks in the last 3 weeks, and all have been claimed by the militant group calling itself Islamic State. With ISIS threatening more attacks, people across the world have begun to say they don't feel safe in public anymore. What about Korea? It was recently ranked as the safest of 120 countries, jumping from 9th last year.
But the seriousness and fear of terrorism seems to be even spreading into this country, as many citizens I talked to here in the capital, Seoul, believe there is a chance of terror attacks here in Korea.
Many countries have been attacked, and I'm afraid. And it's hard to know whether we'll be spared.
With globalization and the freedom to travel, everyone can come and go as they please. I'm worried that Korea's security isn't strong enough.
It's safer than places like Europe and the Middle East, but I don't think Korea is in a safe zone.
Those concerns are growing. An illegal immigrant was arrested in Seoul on Wednesday for suspected ties to a terrorist group. And last month, the National Intelligence Service reported a possible threat from ISIS on the COEX complex in southern Seoul.
ISIS expanding its power beyond their main strongholds of Iraq and Syria to North Africa, Europe, and Asia. On the recent 11th issue of APEC, which is ISIS propaganda magazine, they listed Japan and Korea in the Crusade coalition.
So how prepared would Korea be in a case of an attack?
We South Koreans do not have specific law to regulate terrorist attack or how to respond when terror occurs. So that implies if terror occurs, we have no controlling body. Each branch has to respond respectively. From the terrorist point of view, they try to coordinate and they attack simultaneously. So it's very urgent for Korean politicians to pass the specific law.
As in Western countries, experts here in Korea are also concerned that the rising anxiety could result in unnecessary prejudice against the growing Muslim population. And many say that an analytical approach to ISIS is needed more than ever before. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now, in other news, President Park Geun-hye and other APEC leaders are currently holding their annual Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in the Philippines. South Korea's leader is expected to lay out her administration's policy directives for inclusive growth. Hwang Sang-hee reports from Manila.
This year's APEC summit focuses on building inclusive economies, building a better world. The two-day summit brings together 21 world leaders from countries including the United States, Japan, and China. The APEC nations account for nearly 60% of global GDP and almost half of the world's trade volume. The presidential office of Cheong Wa says President Park will lay out specific policy directives for inclusive growth based on South Korea's experience. These include more support for small and mid-sized firms, human resources development, and bolstering rural communities. Ahead of Thursday's summit, President Park met with business leaders from APEC countries to hear the private sector's opinion on these issues. And as the summit is being held less than a week after the deadly terror attacks in Paris, attention is on whether the leaders will discuss measures for a collective fight against terrorism. At the G20 summit in Turkey last weekend, a rare statement denouncing recent terrorist attacks was adopted.
President Park will wrap up her day by attending the closing ceremony of the APEC summit, where leaders will adopt a joint declaration on ways to build inclusive economies. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News, Manila.
Now, after a few days of will he or won't he, we finally have some degree of confirmation from the United Nations itself that arrangements are underway for UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon to travel to Pyongyang in the near future. At a regular press briefing at UN headquarters in New York on Wednesday, Ban's spokesman said the UN chief has a willingness to play a constructive role in regards to the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Earlier reports suggested the trip would take place this week or the next, but the UN says Ban's agenda is full until next week. If he ends up traveling to Pyongyang, Ban would likely hold talks with Kim Jong-un on the regime's nuclear program and human rights issues. The United States has approved the sale of submarine-launched anti-ship missiles to South Korea. The U.S. Defense Security Cooperation Agency says the U.S. State Department approved the proposed sale of 19 Harpoon Block II missiles and related upgrade kits for an estimated $110 million. The purchase will enhance South Korea's existing Harpoon missile capabilities and boost the Navy's anti-surface warfare performance. The new missiles double the range of South Korea's existing Harpoon missiles and are capable of hitting targets 250 kilometers away. Now, in economic news, consumer prices in Korea have stagnated badly this year. In fact, the country's key measure of inflation is forecast to fall well below 1%, And that would be the lowest level since data was compiled in the late 1940s. And experts say deflation is now a serious and real concern. Kim Min-ji reports.
Korea's consumer price growth is expected to be sub 1% this year. A majority of local brokerage houses expect inflation of between 0.6 to 0.7% this year from a year ago. Last month, the Bank of Korea said prices will likely rise 0.7% this year, down 0.2 percentage points from its previous projection in July. If it pans out like that, it would mark the lowest growth since related data was compiled some 7 decades ago. Statistics Korea data shows consumer prices have been growing less than 1% for this year, and it's on track to remain in the 0% range for the first time in 16 years this year. From 2000 to 2014, average inflation in Korea was 2.9%. In 2013 and 2014, it recorded 1.3% growth on year. So far, consumer price growth this year stands at 0.6%, but if we exclude tobacco prices, which nearly doubled in January, experts say inflation would actually be around 0. This, coupled with the fragile recovery momentum, is raising concerns Korea is heading toward a period of deflation. The government has vowed to closely monitor factors that can influence inflation and prevent any sudden spikes in utility fees that can directly impact the everyday lives of ordinary people. But experts remain skeptical. They say tepid global oil prices as well as a slow global recovery will continue to keep consumer prices low. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, on a related note, really, Korea's producer price index has slipped to its lowest level in 5.5 years under influence of low global oil prices. The Bank of Korea says October's index dropped to 99.75, down 0.6% from the month before. The last time the index was below the benchmark 100 was April 2010. Breaking it down by sector, the price index of coal and petroleum products slumped more than 30% on year last month. The index covering industrial goods was also sharply down, although not so much, at 7.6%. Agricultural and fisheries product prices rose slightly over 2% on year in October. Now, Korea will build a new highway from Seoul to the administrative capital of Sejong to help ease traffic congestion between the two cities. The Transportation Ministry says construction will begin next year and finish completely in 2025. And when complete, the highway will be 129 kilometers long. It's expected to cut the travel time between Seoul and Sejong, home to 36 government agencies now, from an hour and a half to 70 minutes. The project is expected to cost $5.7 billion, and it's going to be financed with public and private funds. Global markets have been put on notice after the US Federal Reserve issued its strongest signal yet that a rate hike is on the cards for next month. While most members of the Fed's policy board think the time is right, not everyone is eager to pull the trigger just yet. Son Jung-in has more.
The Federal Reserve's Policy Board released on Wednesday the minutes of its committee's latest meeting held in late October. The account showed most members of the board anticipated the conditions for raising rates could be met by the time they hold their next meeting in mid-December. With a stronger than expected jobs report in October, they thought the labor market will improve further and inflation will begin to move toward the Fed's 2% annual target. Some confident members even said the conditions had already been reached for liftoff. Although assessments made a few weeks ago do not guarantee anything, the statements represent the strongest signal yet of a possible rate hike in December. But there are still a few others opting to take a more cautious approach. They argue it's too soon to start raising rates due to risks the economy could suffer a setback from unanticipated shocks, including last week's terror attacks in Paris. The Federal Reserve hasn't raised its benchmark rate since 2006, and it has hovered near zero since the 2008 global financial crisis in an effort to stimulate economic growth. The next Fed's policy meeting is set to open for 2 days on December 15th. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
The UN General Assembly is scheduled to vote on a draft resolution on North Korea's human rights record. The resolution lists North Korea's human rights abuses, including torture, public executions and rape, and requests the responsible parties be referred to the International Criminal Court. The resolution, drafted by the European Union and Japan, is expected to pass. It has been submitted every year since 2005. Speaking in New York on Tuesday local time, Lee Hyung-sik, ambassador at large for the North Korean Foreign Ministry, condemned the resolution, saying the information was fabricated and called for it to be withdrawn. And a group of North Korean defectors hoping to start a new life in South Korea have been detained in Thailand. Citing local media, Voice of America reported that Thai police arrested 7 North Koreans on the northern side of the Mekong River. The defectors, made up of young and relatively elderly adults, were traveling without passports. They told the Thai authorities that they wanted to be taken to the South Korean embassy in Bangkok. Now, a growing number of North Korean defectors are being caught after traveling through China to a third country en route to the south. Those captured in China are sent back to North Korea, where they face harsh punishments upon their return. Well, those are stories we've been following on this Thursday afternoon here in Seoul. For more of the latest, don't forget to check out the website arirang.com/news. We also have a smartphone application. You can just search for Arirang TV in the normal places. Have a great day. Goodbye.